She was born on a rainy Thursday morning, the kind that made the sky seem heavy and grey even when the sun tried to peek through. Her parents told stories later about how quiet she was as a baby, how she would study the world with wide eyes, taking in every detail but rarely crying for attention. She had an early curiosity, a sensitivity that set her apart from other children, sometimes delighting her parents, other times unnerving them. They wanted her to fit into neat little boxes, to learn the rules of the world before exploring the edges. From the beginning there were subtle signs. She preferred soft, flowing fabrics, colours that felt vibrant and alive instead of the muted blues and greys her father insisted were appropriate. She lingered over the way sunlight fell across her room, the way shadows moved over the walls, fascinated by light and reflection. Yet she learned quickly that some things were dangerous to reveal. The softness, the curiosity, the desire to explore the self that didn't quite match the world's expectations, all of it had to be quiet, hidden. School became the first arena of constraint. She noticed how children were sorted quickly into patterns. Boys wore certain colours, played certain games, girls wore others. She tried to follow the rules at first, slipping into expected roles, but it never felt right. When she coloured a picture with pink instead of blue, she noticed the fleeting frown from a teacher or the teasing glance from a classmate. Nothing dramatic, nothing cruel, just a quiet moment that sank into her awareness. These small signals were enough to teach her lessons about conformity, about what was safe to reveal. At home, she experimented in private. In her room, she would dress in soft fabrics or adorn herself with ribbons, her hair arranged in ways that felt natural. She imagined herself walking confidently down a street that didn't exist yet, where nobody questioned her existence or her choices. Sometimes, she caught her reflection in the mirror and froze, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't yet have a name for what she was seeing. There was a spark in her eyes, a quiet insistence that this version of herself was real, even if the world was not yet ready to acknowledge it. Her family was loving but traditional. They provided warmth and security, yet they carried expectations, consciously or unconsciously, that she must conform. They spoke of the future in terms of stability, good grades, a respectable career, proper behavior. Love was abundant, yes, but conditional upon adherence to rules she hadn't yet learned how to follow without betraying her inner self. She learned early that the world rewarded predictability, and she was a mystery, even to herself. By the time she reached middle school, the rules had been internalized. She knew which behaviors were acceptable and which were dangerous to express. In the cafeteria, she sat at the edges of tables, careful to avoid drawing attention. She laughed when expected, nodded when necessary, and kept her thoughts carefully tucked away. But inside, a quiet storm brewed, a restless energy that resisted these boundaries, that whispered in the night, "I am more than they see. I am more than this shell of expected behavior." Books became her refuge. She discovered worlds that mirrored fragments of herself, characters who defied expectation, who searched for identity, who learned to stand despite fear. She devoured their stories, reading late into the night under the covers with a small flashlight, the pages warming her hands, the words warming her heart. In the silence of her room, she felt both seen and invisible, both safe and desperate. These stories planted seeds, the possibility of courage, the possibility of a self she could recognize and embrace, even if only in secret. Her relationships with peers were cautious. She wanted friends, yes, but she also feared betrayal. The small acts of kindness she gave and received were carefully measured. She revealed only as much as she could control. She learned to watch, to observe, to take notes silently, memorizing what worked, what was dangerous, what elicited smiles and what elicited judgment. She became an expert in human behavior, a silent observer of life's patterns, all while hiding the true contours of her own identity. Even at home, she practiced concealment. Her closet became a laboratory, a sanctuary of textures, colors, and objects that reflected her spirit. She would spend hours experimenting with combinations of clothing, accessories, and hairstyles, piecing together a version of herself she could feel proud of, even if it could only exist within four walls. Mirrors became both friend and adversary, revealing the self she longed to embody while reminding her of the world's gaze. In those quiet hours, she whispered her truths to no one. Sometimes she recorded them in journals, not for anyone else's eyes but her own. "I am alive, I am me. I am waiting for the day they can see me too." Each line was a heartbeat, each sentence a step toward recognition. She began to understand that her identity was not something shameful or wrong, it was simply undiscovered by the world and at times by herself. Teachers often noticed her intelligence and focus but rarely her depth. They praised her for precision, for correct answers, for following instructions, never realizing that behind her calm exterior was a mind alive with questions, possibilities, and a quiet rebellion against the boxes the world tried to place her in. She learned to appreciate these small victories, the acknowledgement of effort and intellect, while still yearning for something deeper, acknowledgement of her being, not just her performance. Family vacations and outings offered fleeting glimpses of possibility. She noticed other children expressing themselves with abandon, with laughter, with confidence, and she felt a pang of both longing and fear. Could she ever be so free? Could she ever walk through life unguarded, unmeasured, unafraid of judgment? These moments became touchstones, reference points for a future self she could not yet fully name. By the time she entered high school, the tension between concealment and authenticity intensified. Puberty brought changes, both feared and desired, complicating the internal landscape. Her body became a map of curiosity and anxiety. The way people looked at her, the expectations implied in their glances, their words, and even their silences, sharpened her awareness of the world's scrutiny. And yet the private self, the self that had existed in journals, in mirrors, in whispered thoughts, remained vibrant, alive, unbroken. She began to experiment more subtly in public. The curl of a hair, the choice of a shirt, the tilt of her head. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, yet for her it was monumental. The nervous excitement, the tiny thrills, the self-consciousness, all of it reinforced that she was taking the first steps toward self-recognition in the broader world. Her friendships deepened as she carefully selected confidants. A small circle of peers became witnesses to her inner life. They listened, they questioned gently, they offered encouragement without judgment. These relationships became lifelines, fragile but vital, and they taught her that while the world could be daunting, there were pockets of safety and understanding to be found. Evenings remained sacred. After the noise of the day, she returned to her room, allowed herself to move freely, to speak, to breathe. Mirrors, notebooks, and the soft hum of the outside world became companions. In the quiet, she nurtured the self she intended to reveal someday, building courage brick by brick, whisper by whisper. By the end of her high school years, she had mastered a delicate balance, outward compliance, inward authenticity. She had learned to navigate expectations without losing sight of herself. And though the world had not yet fully seen her, she had begun to see herself clearly, to recognize her worth, to understand that the spark she carried since childhood was not accidental. It was her essence, her truth, her quiet, unstoppable light. And so, in the quiet hours before dawn, she learned the first lesson of transformation, that courage begins in silence, in noticing, in daring to be present for oneself, before seeking the gaze of the world.